Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start on time. There will be lots of people drifting in, as all London events have. Welcome to the LSE for this evening's event, hosted by the Department of Management and LSE's Human Resource Management Alumni Group. I always wondered how to say that, and I've got a degree in Latin, so do we say alumni or alumni these days? I don't know. The group is chaired by Suparna Ghosh, who's here at the moment, or just outside. Many thanks for her for organising all this. She's done a great work on that. I'm Leslie Willcocks. I'm a professor here in Management, Technology, Work and Globalisation as my self-appointed title. It allows me to do anything I want, so that's always important. Let me tell you a bit about the HRM group. It's a forum for all LSE alumni who work in the HR and related sectors to connect, interact, and to network in the UK and internationally. The group has proved to be an influential voice in the debate, reflecting and analysing trending themes, topical research, future practice of HR, and its impact. All these things are sort of dealt with by that particular group. They actively work to raise the visibility of the HR professions, facilitate best practice, through a series of events by bringing together key influencers, thought leaders, and experts. Just one thing I'll throw in at this stage. There has been such an interest in this particular theme by speakers, we've had to turn away speakers, that we're going to hopefully run a series of events on this particular theme, developing it as it develops into the 2018. To find out about such upcoming events and opportunities, please join the LSE Human Resource Management LinkedIn group. I understand they are actively seeking volunteers for the committee, and if you would like to help, please seek out Suparna at the drinks following the talk. Suparna. I'm very pleased to, you haven't missed much yet, don't worry, but the administrative stuff you will get. I'm very pleased to be here to welcome our esteemed panel of speakers. My job is to sort of frame the debate a little. And within that, we have Ramyani Basu, principal of AT Kearney, who will talk a lot about cognitive intelligence, which I touch on. We have Alvise Simondetti from Arup, who's a trained architect, but a lot more besides, who will be talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning in his particular line of work. And Purnima Mookerjee, who's managing director at Coutts Private Banking Services. She will show applications within the banking industry that are pretty impressive. So that will give you a lot of fodder for thought, and we invite as many Q&A points as possible. The way that I'm structuring this is I'm going to talk for about 8 to 10 minutes, framing the debate. We then have each speaker doing 8 to 10 minutes, and each speaker will be allowed 2 questions at that stage, max. So there will be 6 questions overall, and then we'll throw it open to Q&A. If you have no questions to the panel, I have a very long list. So, because I'm very interested in what they're going to talk about. So that's the way we're going to structure it, and I'm ahead of the game at the moment, so it's very good, it's very promising. So my job is to sort of frame this debate somewhat. And I'm going to do that by talking a little bit about what's in 3 books that we've written on this area. The first one was Service Automation Robots and the Future of Work, which does answer this question, where are we heading? You'll be aware that there's a massive polarization, especially in the headlines that you read, and people, in order to get into the media, have to polarize their own versions of the truth, and very often either side on being very optimistic or very pessimistic, or very pro-technology or very against technology. I hope that here at the LSE today with these speakers we're going to have a much more complex and nuanced position on what is going to happen, not least because technology itself is at least double-edged in its impacts. And I think one of the saddest things about the debate as it's unfurled is that we've had an anchor point. And the anchor point has been this University of Oxford study, which is great in itself for its date, 2013-14, but come up with this figure of 47% of UK jobs could be automated sometime in the future. We don't know exactly when. And everyone's reinterpreted that in any way that they want to say we're all going to be robotized overnight, virtually. Something along that line, along a spectrum of beliefs about that. It's not helped to have that as the anchor. I was attending a session by Michael Lewis, who wrote a book called The Undoing Project about Kahneman and Dvorsky, and they have this thing about human fallibility, that if you get anchored, however random the anchor, you can't move away far from the anchor, and the whole debate is anchored in that. If I told you that the actual anchor should be 12 to 14% net job loss within the next 15 years, which is our conclusion, you would have a completely different debate. So hopefully that's the sort of debate we're going to have today. So more complex to nuance. I mean, you've got some great headlines here. Humans, roadkill in the information superhighway. Whoever owns the robots runs the world. These sorts of stuff. And you've got great figures in the narrative. This is the Japanese automated hotel, indicating that the way it's all going. And I call this the sort of I call this the automatopia vision, which is the other vision of that is the great singularity. It's all going to be run by technology, and we haven't got anything to worry about in the future. The other vision is the Autogeddon vision, which is, and the picture there is the Terminator type of movies. That's where we're all headed for oblivion through automated wars. So we want to get to grips with where we actually are, as opposed to these fantasies about where we could be. And where we are is what we've been studying. And what we have been studying at the LSE in our Department of Management is essentially robotic process automation and cognitive automation. Despite the headlines, what we're seeing is these being a very small market. The market for robotic process automation, the things that, as I describe it, takes the robot out of the human, is less than a $1 billion a year market, growing exponentially at about 50 to 60% over the next 5 years. But that's a very, very small market, taking away jobs, supposedly. The market for cognitive automation, where you're talking about cognitive work being automated, where you're looking at automating unstructured data, natural language processing, reasoning, prediction, and if you can, understanding why events take place. That's a very immature market, and we're not seeing a huge amount of adoption, a lot of activity in conferences, but no real adoption until back end of autumn 2018, really, of cognitive automation, but quite a lot of investments going in there. That might be these markets by 2024, the RPA market might be 12 billion, the CA market might be 80 billion, but these still are very small markets, and it's a big contrast between that and this talk of work all being automated in this accelerated way. So let's have a look, for example, at what RPA does and what our findings are so far. I admit that it's early days, but let's look at what we're finding out. This is one of our books on the subject. A good archetype example is exchanging, doing the back office of Lloyd's of London, London Insurance Market. They're the BPO services provider. And this is an example of one process that got automated. Insurance brokers, there are several hundreds in Lloyd's of London. They write business with clients. They produce a London Premium Advice Note. That goes to a knowledge worker, in inverted commas. She, in this case, she receives the London Premium Advice Note, structures it so that it can fit templates, and then finds errors, deals with the exceptions, add more data from systems of record, and then processes it. It drops into the London Insurance Repository as an official contract, and it used to take 2 days to process 500 of those. They automated all the bits in the pink, and it now takes 30 minutes to process those 500 LPANs. That's the sort of power of this type of automation. And to give you another idea of this is the stuff that's what I call describe as taking the robot out of the human. You know, doing the idiot jobs that none of us should really be doing, the repetitive tasks that depend on rules, structured data with a definite outcome. But nevertheless, very powerful. So Telefonica O2, N-Power, exchanging here, the top two there have automated 35% of their back office work. They're processing 1 million transactions a month. N-Power 3 million. And what's interesting is they're getting these very high returns on investment that you wouldn't get from normal IT software, which is a sort of blessed relief to many people in business because they're pretty fed up with being disappointed by information technology. But the other interesting thing about this is it's not really about cost saving or headcount reduction, it's about multiple business benefits. If you look in the middle, you'll see that they're actually getting a huge number of multiple business benefits. So it's very impactful. But we found a number of myths about that. First of all, we didn't find it replacing human beings. We found it replacing some work within Indian offshore companies that were outsourcing providers, but on domestic situations in the USA, UK, Europe, we were finding that there was no significant job loss. There was significant redeployment. There was significant other activity within HR, reskilling, for example, but not really big layoffs. Secondly, we didn't find people threatened by RPA. They embraced it. They embraced it because in every case, there was real big problems going on. That's why they adopted the automation in the first place. And they saw this as taking away the uninteresting work so they could focus on the really interesting work, sometimes work about dealing directly with customers. It doesn't replace the IT department. You need the IT behind this in order to make it function. It doesn't bring back many jobs offshore. I call this the Trump fallacy. You know, what we're actually finding is that work comes back, but not jobs, because they're automated. It's not driven by cost savings, as I indicated. Multiple business benefits are coming from this. It doesn't replace an entire person's job. It tends to replace parts of people's jobs, the uninteresting, repetitive tasks, freeing them up to do other things. Limitations, it only deals with structured data, certain optimized business processes, so you can't apply it to any process. Doesn't do cognitive work, we'll hear about that later, but you can apply it to sub-processes. Quickly on, our new book's on cognitive automation coming out in February, and we looked at this in some detail, and our first panelist is going to look at more detail. I'm going to gloss over this very quickly, although we have about 10 cases of it in our book. I mean, what's interesting about this is that there are victories and defeats on cognitive automation. You all know that these things can play games better than human beings, like chess, Jeopardy, Go, and poker. We've all got great results from that. You also know that there was massive investment and massive amounts of data needed in order to get those machines to achieve those results. You might know less about the defeats. One interesting one, I was looking up defeats, and I found this lovely website called Invisible Boyfriend. The Invisible Boyfriend says that they've got an automated virtual agent, and that you can actually have a relationship with the automated agent, ask it questions. And it turned out that when we interviewed the CEO, and she said, well, actually, it doesn't work. It was, you know, we'd say, hey, the person would come in and say, hey, it was a great movie last night. And she said, yeah, I really like popcorn. Or something like that in reply. It was sort of non-sequitur response. So what they ended up doing was having a workforce that pretended to be artificial intelligence, pretended to be cognitive automation. And the irony was that the majority of people in the workforce were female, which I thought was quite funny. I call this artificial intelligence. And there's an awful lot of it about, you'll discover. human beings slaving away to make the machines look good. The second one was Tay-Tweets, which many of you will be familiar with. In fact, this is not an example of incompetence by the machine. It worked too well. It was set to speak and deal with millennials, and it picked up very quickly that they're, at least off the ones that were using this, you know, they were right-wing, highly prejudiced, very discriminatory in their language, and were very rude. And so Tay-Tweets became exactly that. They had to take that one down. And the other one is IBM Watson. For every success you read about IBM Watson, you'll read a defeat. The nasty one was with MD Anderson Cancer Center. Unfortunately, one of the headlines, not IBM's, I hasten to add, but one of the headlines was IBM cures cancer, which, you know, it's not a very good idea, really. But they didn't cure cancer. In fact, they lost $63 million in that particular cancer center not applying that. So what I'm trying to get over is that, you know, for all the optimism about this automation, it's not perfectible. And it's running into lots of problems. Very quickly, the data side is a lot more onerous than you'd ever believe, having sat through many implementations now. There are limitations of machine learning, which people are running into. It doesn't translate directly into what is known as artificial intelligence, although people like to pretend that it's not so far away. And then there's this whole area of what happens to the technology when you put it into social, political, and economic environments. And there's a very big issue there, which leads me to my last slide, which I was very desperate to get to, which is really a summary of where we are here. So if you remember, you know, there's this anchor figure of 35% of UK jobs could be lost in the next 15 years, 47% of the US. And say, what we found was that there were 8 major qualifiers to that statement. Here they are in 2 minutes, all right? We have written about this, but the first one is, it's not whole jobs lost. McKinsey did a great study, and they found that only 5% of jobs at the moment could be automatable. It's part of jobs that are being automated. Typically, we think about 25% of everybody's jobs will be automated or taken over by technology in the next 5 to 8 years. And why would that be surprising? It's already happened. So there's that. Secondly, most of the studies do not factor in job creation, which is a bit of a mistake. When you think that another study looked at the application of the internet in France between 1995 and 2011 came to the conclusion that for every 1 job lost, 2.5 were gained. So there's not a history of long-term job loss related to technology. Is this time different? We don't know, but there are already being jobs created by these technologies already. In fact, there's a skills shortage in RPA, ironically. You can't buy these people for less than a certain amount these days. Speed of technology deployment, this is the big one. We think that this is going to be a lot slower than everyone thinks. So when we talk about driverless cars, which is the emblem for big technology going to have a big impact, how many of you think that we're all going to have driverless cars within 5 years? You do, right? You do, okay. Well, you're not, but you know, you can have your belief if you like. But we just know what you have to go through for the diffusion of innovation of something like that, when you consider the number of cars in existence and things like how much money people actually have to invest in these things. But here's a figure I'll give you, which is one study showed that when you looked at all the previous technologies, to deploy something 90% of its potential throughout the world economy takes between 8 to 25 years. 8 to 25 years. There are exceptions on the consumer side, but when you look at it, that's actually pretty accurate, I think. The next thing is the perfectibility of the technology. Actually, we haven't got a good record on information technology. Most of it is pretty imperfect and rushed out quite quickly in order to meet the demand that's there that might go away. And that's why we have all these versions coming out. It's not because we're improving it, it's because we made a much hash of it the first time round, in my humble belief, but it's extremely well sold as, you know, we're perfecting it. So we think that there's going to be problems there. One of the outcomes of that is that you're going to have humans hanging around checking up on these machines. If you just take those factors in, you're probably backed down from a job loss of 35, 47% to about 12 to 14% net job loss over the next 15 years. But then you've got three factors that then erode that. The first one is aging populations and slow birth rates in major economies. And it's creating skills and productivity shortfalls. One estimate is that China, for example, which automating is quite crazy, and Japan, they're doing so because aging populations and shortage of labor. One estimate was that China will be short of 600 million full-time equivalents between 2016 and 2026. No wonder they're automating. I mean, they're automating in order to cope. USA at this present moment has a shortfall of skills of 15 million between 2015 and 2020. There is a belief that when you look across the G20, there is about a surplus of 50 million low skills jobs, workers, but a shortage of 45 million high and medium skills. So clearly the objective here is to re-educate, retrain, accelerate that process before you begin to bring these technologies in and can utilize them to their full potential. The seventh factor, which I said is a big black hole in all studies, is the dramatic increase in the amount of work to be done. I'm not going to go into that. I'm writing several papers on that, but I'll just indicate where that comes from. First of all, the exponential data explosion. If the amount of data in the world increases by 50% per annum, there's a hell of a lot of processing to be done. There's a hell of a lot of work to be done there. If we are, and you all are victims of this, if there's a dramatic increase in the amount of audit, regulation, and bureaucracy, and I'm sure several of our guests can talk about how she spends her time in banking nowadays, if there's an exponential growth in that, there's a dramatic increase in the amount of work to be done. And actually, technology creates jobs. If you want an example, cybersecurity. It's a huge growth area. You know, they're losing about $540 million a year, and that's growing every year. The cybersecurity industries are worth about $140 billion a year, I think, at the moment. And that's growing. So that's an interesting development as well. And finally, people are really underrating the importance of human beings in work. And there's one study that I quote, I'm nearly finished now. One study I quote, which says that that you can divide human activity at work into 18 major activities. Of those, about 9 could be automated in the next 20 years, from now in the next 20 years. The other 11, probably not in the next 30 to 50 years. So that's, what's that? 9 out of 18. That's 11 will not be. Now, that's quite a startling finding by people who are expert and objective, looking at this in great detail, who understand the technology and understand human beings. And actually, one of the things we say at LSE, we say, yeah, by all means, we teach an MSc in information technology, and we say, by all means, get technical. Realize that there are technical jobs, but the really valuable things will be critical thinking, working with people, team working, leadership, intuition, empathy, all these human things that machines can't do. This is what's going to be valuable in the future. So without more ado, I'm going to pass on, having framed the discussion, I'm going to pass on to our next speaker, Ramyani Basu, who's going to talk more about cognitive automation, cognitive intelligence.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for wonderfully framing the topic for tonight and giving it a bit of a broad definition so that we can play around it. Good evening, everyone. I'm a senior principal with Kearney, driving digital transformation. My area of focus is 3 industries: consumer goods, retail, and banking, retail banks. So essentially any and every industry that has a consumer focus to it. I'm a diehard consumer, so I think that goes very nicely with me. It's an honor to talk about a topic that has captured headlines and it's only growing in numbers. I think if robots could have actually got an idea, they would be surprised how much they are dominating the headlines today. So, you know, when I thought about talking about this subject, I kind of felt it's a topic that has absolute polarization of views, right? It's either talked about the maximum positive that can happen, it's like a promise that it's going to change the world, to the other end of it, which is all about it's going to extinguish everything and that this is the last innovation that we can have. Look at what Sundar Pichai says. He's kind of saying AI is going to really help us solve the biggest problems that we as mankind can't solve. Climate change, cancer diagnosis, versus look at the other side of Elon Musk kind of saying, today, if we embrace AI, we are talking about an existential threat. So I think the truth actually lies somewhere in the middle. It's really not a full promise and it's not a full peril. My purpose today in the next 10 minutes is really about trying to debunk the myth and think about what should organizations, as they prepare for the AI journey coming forward, be considering and what are the implications that they should be thinking ahead of time so that they are better prepared to embrace it and they get the real value out of it. But if we talk about artificial intelligence, people think it's a new technology and that's where the myth comes from, right? It actually has a long history. Back in 1950s, Alan Turing, who is a British scientist, who was well renowned at the World War II timeframe because he invented the first machine that actually could decipher the German codes. And that's where he could make the machines intelligent, and that's where he named it artificial intelligence. So if you think about it, it's really back at least 70 years back. That's the history we're talking about. Artificial intelligence has got 3 phases of evolution. The first one I call as assisted intelligence, which is really about driving efficiency. These are things that today mankind are doing, but you can do much faster. Great example. Aflac insurance company, they took assisted intelligence and literally turned around their claim processing from 2.6 days per claim to few hours a day. Now that's where human could have done the job. You are driving huge amount of efficiency. Comes the next one, which we call as the augmented intelligence, which is really about doing things that you as humans or we as humans cannot do today. Great example, look at Netflix. Netflix superior content suggestion is essentially based on deep learning. So it can absolutely send and suggest us things based on my needs and my preference. Look at Amazon Polly. Again, natural language generator that can absolutely take machines' logical form and turn it into natural language. The last but not the least, the autonomous intelligence, which Leslie referred to as a cognitive computing. That's the one which is essentially about doing things and letting machines decide on your behalf. So you're letting machines make the decisions of your business without you interfering. Now, driverless car is a great example of it, but this is also the one that has actually come into play only now. So if I now take a step back from the concept of artificial intelligence, you would see that it really isn't that bad. We are actually reaping benefits. We don't understand we are reaping benefits, but it's always there. Now, then the bigger question comes, how does organizations prepare themselves for it? You can debate a whole evening about it. I thought I'm going to pick 5 questions. First, how will the workforce change? Second, how will employment change? Third, what skills will become more relevant and hence will really thrive in an autonomous world? Fourth, how will organizations change and thrive in an autonomous world, and what needs to happen for that? And last but not the least, how will you drive success? And what are the drivers of success in an AI-driven world? So if you look into the workforce or employment change, no doubt, as Leslie was also pointing out, there are always activities in any occupation, any job that are boring, that are mundane, that are rules-driven, that are systematic. So those kind of tasks will get automated over the future. Now, does that mean that it's going to be a huge job loss? Not really, at least not in the near term and the midterm we're talking about. So what would that mean essentially is that you would see occupations having automation brought in, which means it will require business process transformation. It means repositioning of the jobs. So the key takeaway for workforce and employment part is that don't focus on the redundancies. Focus on how your jobs need to really look at the strategic, creative side of it and how you reposition the jobs for your people so that people feel more excited doing it. So that's the first takeaway. The second one, what skills become more relevant in an AI world? Now, there are many skills. I thought I'll pick 3. And these are very close to my heart. So the first one, I would say, is the creative skills and anything about specificity. So what do I mean? So you can always kind of program a machine to write a poem, but you really can't make a Shakespeare out of him, right? So that's the creative part, right? So the artists, the actors, the archaeologists, anything that has a creative stint to it is where it will still be there, and that cannot be automated. You would not want to go to a football ground where, you can have autonomous robots playing football. I mean, that will be really weird to watch. So, if you think about it, it's the creative and the specific skills that will stay. The second one, what I talk about is empathy. So think about going to a therapist, right? A therapist is all about interaction between two people. Of course, you can automate some of the interactions, and we do it. I mean, I have been helping many clients with chatbots. But a real therapy session, a real coach, those are skills that absolutely will stay with humans in the near future, and as well as in the midterm. And last but not the least, the technology skills, like the data scientists, the machine learning experts, the artificial intelligence experts. I mean, I think if anything, that's the skills that are definitely going to boom. And the challenge that organizations are going to face tomorrow is that they would not have as many of those skill set people to hire. And even if they hire them, these are the most difficult people to retain. So that's what's going to happen for your skills. So then let's look at, so what does that mean? So you have got a workforce and an employment sector that's going to go through a lot of transformation. You have got skills that has got different focus. Essentially, organizations will go through a faster pace of change, a lot of ambiguity to handle, a lot of uncharted complexity to resolve. That essentially means that, when you're thinking of, for example, you're thinking of hiring. You will not only be hiring a person who has the right skills, but you want the person to have the maximum learnability and adaptability, because you don't know how the future is going to change. So you need those skills to be in place. If you think about HR as a function, for example, so today HR mostly takes care of the traditional process of evaluation and recruitment. Tomorrow, HR's focus will be completely shifted into how you can leverage employee experience-driven HR, which kind of binds together the contingent workforce. Because HR can now leverage a lot of data, insights, artificial intelligence to drive thinking. So in a sense, it's not about the skills, it's about the learnability, and it's about the organization's readiness for change, organization's positive attitude to change. So if I now try to bring it all together and take a very strategic view to it, what are the drivers of success? Again, coming to my 3 things. I think the first is about what I say as the North Star thinking, because oftentimes organizations get excited seeing technology and say, I want this and I want that, let's RPA here, let's RPA there. Well, that's a wrong start. You got to have where is your purpose and how does technology enable you to get there? And that North Star thinking should be linked to the strategy, which essentially says, how are you making AI as a choice? What's the difference? How are you going to put the eggs in your basket between assisted intelligence to augmented intelligence to autonomous intelligence? And in making those choices, there is a question of speed, cost, technical feasibility, but most importantly, your trust. Are you able to trust your technology to make decisions for you, for your business? I think that becomes very critical. So that's number one. Number two, which I call as, make technology an enabler and ensure that you direct the technology. So what do I mean by that? Autonomous intelligence, even though you'd be able to have driverless cars, you still need governance and policies to make sure it's an evolving technology. So how do you have the right governance and policies so that your business is benefiting from it and not that you are taking a wrong course of action? Last but not the least, it's the people. It's the people that count for any transformation. AI is not a technology transformation. It is a business transformation. And in any business transformation, the fundamental make or break case is your people. And the whole point about how you bring your people together to interface with the machines that you're talking about is absolutely critical. And it's all tied by great leadership. If you don't have great leadership who has the right North Star thinking and the strategy, who understands that technology choices have to be made correctly, and who pulls the right people together, you're not going to be successful at it. You can absolutely put the money there, but success doesn't come so easily. So those three things I think are your drivers of success in an AI world. It's not easy, but it's definitely very, very exciting path forward. So going back to where I started, promise versus peril. Is it a promise or a peril? I hope I have been able to give you a little bit of flavor as to that it's not really a left or a right-hand choice. It's somewhere in the middle. And I feel me being very positive, it's a promise to go beyond the peril. And that's the attitude that businesses should have, workplaces should have, employees should have to embrace AI and decide how to take AI forward. Love this quote from Ray Kurzweil, which talks about, going forward, AI could make a huge difference into the humanity. It's something, it will be a pivotal technology, and we should definitely embrace it. So with that, I thank you so much for listening and look forward to the questions.
Right, you've all been very attentive, so here's your opportunity to ask 2 questions. There is a microphone around somewhere, but if you've got a loud voice, just shout. I saw you first, so can you shout? Here we go.
So my question, if it's okay, I mean, it could be directed to you or to the panel in general, which is that I'd be interested in knowing how the panel actually defines what AI is and how is it different. AI.
Specifically AI.
Yes.
Because there are definitions for RPA, CA, AI.
Yeah, no, specifically for AI. And I guess how do you sort of, because, I guess my question is, obviously you have sort of machine learning, but machine learning is also an umbrella term for deep learning and loads of other techniques, and also the sort of more old school type of AI in terms of expert systems. And I guess how do you feel about that, and what would be the difference between that and sort of general analytics or data analytics?
Do you want to start with that? Margaret Bowden's definition of AI is technology, designing technology that tries to replicate how the mind works, remembering that the mind is conscious and aware. Now, my view is that, my little pat bit is RPA, the power of RPA is the reality, it works. The power of CA is the promise. The power of AI is the hype at the moment, because most of it in business terms doesn't exist. You might be correcting me on that one, because in your business it might be more developed. So that's my view, but...
See, this is the difference of views, right? Which makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
So why don't I give an example of what's the difference between AI and machine learning? Because I think it's very interchangeably used today in the industry. So I think AI is responsible for creating smart machines, while machine learning expert is responsible for making the machine intelligent. So they are very intertwined and linked. AI, as I was trying to say, it has evolved over the years, and it also has got different purpose. It could drive efficiency, which is assisted. It could drive augmented intelligence, which is really about doing things that you never managed to do before. But the third one, which is where the hype of whether it's a promise or peril comes, because you are giving a machine the ability to make decisions on your behalf, which is where you're kind of passing on the baton, right? So you're kind of saying, decide my business for me, which is where the whole worry, fear, hype, whatever you call it, comes from. So I think it has its three kind of definitions of AI. It kind of all goes under the umbrella of artificial intelligence because it's smarter machines who's doing things.
Do you want to go at that or not bother?
I'm good.
Are you okay?
I'm going to put it together with
You're going to, yeah, that's correct.
Together.
So
Excellent.
one more question, then we'll get to Alvise. He doesn't want to interrupt himself. Yeah.
So of the 5 areas that you covered, one of your points was about organizations changing. Could you tell us a bit more how collaboration between organizations will change in light of these new technologies? So, redefining the boundaries of firms. And if you have already started seeing any change in that respect?
Great question. So if you think about the world we live in, or the world in the future we are going to live in, data is the oil, right? So what happens is having the data and making insights out of data is the one that will be the decision point of when organizations will succeed versus when organizations will fail. Now, going forward, we will see industries kind of working much closer on the data, because data is not owned actually by the industry, right? It flows across. So the whole point about how organizations forefront the data and insights across the organization to give better consumer experience, better customer experience, better overall experience, and better social, drive better social responsibility, is where I think this will all come together.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank
Alvise,
you so much.
Thank you very much, Ramyani. Alvise Simondetti.
Thank you.
He's been
Thank
doing
you.
great work with Arup. Over to you.
Great. And this one goes.
It's just that one.
Oh, it's not finished yet. Sorry. One more slide and that's it.
Alvise. Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I work in Arup. I sit in a team called Foresight team. And the Foresight team sits within a wider team in the organization called Arup University. It's an internal name, but it has something to do with learning. So within the Foresight team, my role is to look at tools and methods for across the company worldwide. And I have been doing this for 17 years, so I have I can check some of my predictions that I made in the past. About a couple of years ago, one of my bosses came around and said, Alvise, we looked at McKinsey, they said that AI is going to change the world. Can you have a look at it? And I thought, oh no. I had spent some time at MIT, 2 years at MIT in 95, 97, and I never quite sympathized with this idea of artificial intelligence, back to your question. And this idea that you could replace humans in making decisions and put machines, I never quite liked it. And so I got specialized in 3D printing for making decisions. And when I looked into it, I actually found that there was a whole new approach to artificial intelligence. So to me, artificial intelligence is what humanity is aiming for. We are aiming for an artificial intelligence because we cannot make as many decisions or as many good decisions as we should be making. Think about, deciding how to set up a city or where to place concentrate densities and stuff like that. There is many big decisions, many small decisions as well. So you aim for an artificial intelligence. You have an approach, which is the traditional approach, which I disliked, in the 90s, and that was the artificial intelligence with expert systems. That is another key word that comes in. And since 2012, or around that, there has been a new approach to artificial intelligence. This is the artificial intelligence with machine learning. So this is what this is about. This whole big discussion, in my understanding, is about the approach to achieve an artificial intelligence with machine learning. If you have a ton of data, or big data, you then have an approach with deep learning, and you basically achieve a higher level of prediction. I give you three or four examples. And I want to also mention another thing. So when we started a couple of years ago, or a bit more, we looked at the paper that Leslie presented, and what caught my attention, this is the Future of Employment by Frey and Osbourne at Oxford. And what caught my attention is the fact that they say that market and domain experts are going to be redundant and may become detrimental. And they also say that models, as in algorithms, this is human-made algorithms, so the human makes a theory and then makes an algorithm out of the theory and it automates, are going to become redundant, they may become detrimental. So if you look at our industry, is the architecture, engineering, construction industry, we are full with experts. You know, these companies are made out of experts, including quite a lot of us here. And so this is kind of an interesting hypothesis and provocations, and I go along with Leslie to the idea that this was a seminal paper, most cited paper somewhere in some statistics. And it was, but I think that it is a provocation, right? So we then went and looked at it. And so these are some facts. So this is to say that I'm not going to come and speak to you as an expert, because, you know, I don't want to be of the category that is going to be redundant or detrimental. I speak to you as a deep, you got to be deep these days, so I'm a deep observer. So my deep observation brought me to this, which is quite impressive. So here is Google, this is built environment. So this is applications in the built environment. And I'm giving you 4 data points. So the first one is here. So these guys, they had data centers, and they are well recognized in the industry as state of the art and in their energy consumption. So this is the best data centers. When I show this article to my colleagues that are mechanical engineers, I'm an architect by training, they said what really shocked me is the fact that this is a 40% improved on cooling energy, so nearly half the cooling energy on best practice. How did they do it? What they did is they looked at the energy demand, and they predicted the energy peaks. So it turns out that the energy peaks in Google is driven by YouTube. YouTube is driven by teenagers. And so when Casey Neistat publishes his blog, there is 1 million teenagers that watches within, I don't know, a few minutes. And that is the peak energy consumption of the Google data centers. And so if you predict that by predicting the demand, they could actually deliver these incredible results that you could never do otherwise, and 15% in overall consumption. Another data point here is, we looked at our structural engineering practice. And Arup has, and the industry has a lot of structural engineers, and these are all experts. And so what is it going to, so what we did is we did a little test, and we asked, we gave a number of, this is predicting the glass thickness. So we gave a number of different shapes of panels, and one of the things the experts do right up front in the project is they, with the years and years of expertise, they will tell you how thick is the panel. And say, you know, if you have a 2.7 by 8.7 meters panel, then you get a certain thickness. And if you have a smaller panel, of course, you need a lesser thickness. And some of these panels are pretty common, and some of them are uncommon. And if you look at the results, basically the machine has achieved the answer faster, more accurate, but neither the human nor the predicting machines achieved the actual thickness, which was then calculated with traditional methods. This is deterministic practice. I'm going to move on to the third and last example. And here is, I just wanted to give you a bit of diversity. When we look at machine learning, we want to have data points and we want to have diversity. So I figured this one would fit. So here is 3D printing, and all of you have heard a lot about 3D printing. I was an expert back in '97. I knew more than anyone else. And there is something special about this 3D printing. And I can tell you that the reason why it's special is because it's very big. Yeah, you don't print stuff that you can walk through it, etc. So how could this company, AI built, could print? The reason why they could print it is because this is the other thing that is special, that is all wobbly. The reason why they could print so fast is because generally 3D printers are deterministic. You have a very, very long script of commands, and they deposit painstakingly, precisely all of their bits of plastic. This one is a probabilistic 3D printer. So it's actually jumping ahead and depositing the material, and then it goes and checks where it has deposited, and it will amend it. I can see pressure. There were 4 examples. One of the largest area of application currently is, as I am along with my colleagues, that machine learning or deep learning at the moment, it has a superhuman perception, but it can't reason, even though people say that it reasons. It certainly has superhuman perception. One of the things that it does is it goes through tunnels, looks at tunnels, surfaces, and it learns how to distinguish between joints, cracks, and scratches. And then it can do condition maintenance. This is in replacing the current industry standard, which is scheduled maintenance. What are we going to do as a company? As a company, we want to shock our colleagues into this new approach. So we have a digital transformation program. One of the parts of the program is an exhibition in our headquarters in Fitzroy Street. And there we present what it is, AI with machine learning. It's called AI enabling machines to learn. And then what are some of the applications, and what are some of the applications, and now what are the steps? I'm not an expert in work, but I am a deep observer. So I did go to MIT, back to MIT, where this event was held. 2 things I observed. One is that Eric Schmidt, chairman of Alphabet, said, if you are a human, concentrate on things that the machine can't do very well, which I think is simple, but is pretty important, because they will beat you. The other thing that I found out is that white collars will be automated before blue collars, which is very counterintuitive. And the third thing is from Kai Fun. He is a venture capitalist in China, only focused on AI. He talks about the 4 waves of AI, and he explained how China is blasting ahead in terms of artificial intelligence, fueled by the fact that they have 10 times more data, because everything is 10 times bigger in China. So more people, the uptake of more smartphone is very much bigger, and also the fact that it is a less regulated part of the world. Thank you.
you very much, Alvise. Any questions for Alvise? We're allowed up to 2.
Here, there's one here.
I can't. One?
Hi, thank you. I work as an aerospace engineer, and I don't really see that sort of change which some people predict in terms of all of us being replaced by AI in the next, say, 5-10 years. But I do kind of feel that there's a level of complacency in terms of how the effect of RPA or these automated processes, because I do think that eventually it kind of strips people from, or strips jobs from the skills that they need. And what I would want to ask is that, is it something that being considered? Because I never really seen these analyses that how will white-collar jobs change eventually in terms of push on wages, because you're just not going to need that level of training. People are not going to need those sort of skills that they acquired these days at universities. You'll just be pulling levers. And equally, do you think that this will lead eventually to a very large precariat in some sense, a large group of people who just can't bargain for their jobs? And you know, it's almost like a low-skilled job, except these people have university degrees.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pass it on also to my colleagues. I want to answer one little part of your question. The question is a big question. What is in my mind is if all the algorithms are emerging from the data, and if there is a handful of computer scientists like Jan LeCun or some of those that come out of the top schools, and the rest is all emerged from the data, you just recycle the neural net. Why are so many people studying computer science and getting into that? That's a question in my mind. What I think, though, is that we are not looking at many aspects in our decisions. And I'm talking specifically, I'm most excited about the decisions about large, complex decisions, about cities and big systems. We just look at, and if we are lucky, we get like a dozen aspects. In the built environment, we look at the architecture, the landscape, the lighting, the acoustics, people movement. There is another 6, and that's it. The stability, structural stability, and so on, security. But there are many more aspects that we should look at, because actually our decisions have implications to a much, much larger group. So recently we had a presentation by a colleague that has developed an AI that decides whether things are beautiful or scenic or not scenic. As soon as she presented to us, the audience started asking, what about this? You know, is biased towards this, is biased towards that, is biased towards that. All of a sudden, you see that all of these experts come back into play, because they are the one that will sort out what is the weather bias in your judgment of scenicness, and what is your et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there will be transformation. You will be looking at the data sources that you pour into the machine as opposed to the algorithms. Thank you. Way too long. Yeah.
Right, let's have, sorry, but we're going to have one more question, if there is one for Alvise. If not, we'll move on.
Yes, there is.
One more, yeah.
There's one here.
Thank you. I don't know if this is fully applicable to you or the topic, but this is a question that's really been on my mind in regards to AI and the future of work. From what I've seen after the Great Recession 10 years ago, there's been a slow rebound in middle-class positions as these jobs tend to be routine and rule-based and thus automated. Do you think that there will be a rebound in these types of positions, or will society need to invest in more education for these people to fill new higher roles, or are these people simply digital losers? I know that there's a lot of lower wage jobs as it costs more to automate those, and I know there's a lot of higher paying jobs now. From what I've seen, there's kind of the middle has slow rebounded. So I don't know if this is a question for you or the rest of the panel, or if anyone has any insights on this.
Well, I think I'm going to also help get some help from the rest of the panel. What I'm most interested is this fact that I think the Professor Mario Carpo has just published a book called The Second Digital Turn, and he's a professor of history of technology here at UCL. And in the book, he talks about the fact that the Industrial Revolution has separated the maker from the making. And this digital revolution is separating the thinker from the thinking. So, I mean, you touched up, you came with the assumption that it is the blue collars jobs that are going to go. I think that the big impact is going to be on my personal take is if the blue collars had to go, they could have gone in many times in the past, and they haven't. Some have, a lot have, and some haven't. And I think that all the jobs that include dexterity, machines are really clumsy at it, and they seem to be going to become clumsy. So I think that the key interesting bit is the fact that it is more the managers. Of course, a lot of us are managers, so it's kind of hard to say that, but it is that.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Purnima Mookerjee.
Because I have a different take on
go on.
it. So I think in the drive for digital transformation, there are two things that has to change fundamentally. So first is, gone are the days where you make a technology decision and then you say that it's going to be a 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 year program, because that's a fundamental recipe for failure. So you kind of have to, your technology is just enabling you for a business transformation, whatever the technology is, right? And in a sense, you have to build in two things. One is the user centricity in designing what you are trying to achieve. So your users are built into the program. And the second thing, what I call is a minimal viable product mindset. So a minimal viable product mindset essentially assures that you're looking to build a product that's minimally viable, that users can test. You can have early signs of failure or early signs of not accepting the product, so that you are absolutely diminishing all the errors that can happen or all the dissatisfactions that can happen if the product comes up. It's like Rome was never built in a day. So why would you even want to try to build a huge product or a solution in one go? So I think that alone makes a huge differentiation for the fact that it can allow you for experimentation and innovation, but it can also allow users to come into it to build something that's more viable and more accepted by them. And I think in that journey, when I talk to my clients, and those are mostly consumer-facing industries, I always say bring the consumers in, because they are going to consume your product. They are going to consume your solution. Thank you.
Right, thank you. There was a question over here. There you go.
Hello, I'm a management consultant who tries to sell machine learning and has sold RPA. And in the past 5 years or 6 years, I've seen that a lot of businesses are very happy with traditional business process outsourcing. And my basic question, especially to my competitor, is do you think that there's a risk that RPA and potentially machine learning is the next business process outsourcing, where in 10 years' time we see those things coming back as well and customers potentially being very unhappy with the long-term consequences?
So the question, my hearing's not great, so the question I heard was that is it a threat to BPO outsourcing, automation? Was that the question?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
The question is maybe the outsourcing of 10, 20 years ago, which hasn't really delivered today's artificial intelligence or RPA.
Will AI deliver?
Yeah. So that's my question, because I'm selling it.
Okay.
I'm worried about the long-term consequences.
I know something about outsourcing. So I can give you the quick bit on the outsourcing bit, which is when you say outsourcing hasn't delivered, that's not quite true. I mean, the typical figure that we researched was that 20% are doing extremely well, 20% are doing very badly, and the rest are struggling at various levels. But they would rehire their outsourcing provider again. So, you know, it's a very distributed model. And in fact, people, you know, all the indicators are that outsourcing will continue to grow. There's no one that I've seen who's produced a model that said that there's not 4 to 5% growth in the outsourcing over the next five years. So now the interesting question is whether the outsourcers are going to adopt automation, and if so, are they going to share the gains that they get from that in terms of cost saving and labor saving with their clients? And the clients are pretty anxious that they will do. I think that's the bit about outsourcing. But there is a bigger question there. Will AI pay off in the way that outsourcing didn't?
I think the world needs to move from, and I think outsourcing has already seen that move, right? It's been more than 2 decades of outsourcing that this country has alone gone through. So it has moved from looking at it as let's outsource a problem and it's no more my problem, to let's look at outsourcing with a more outcome focus. And when you have an outsourcing arrangement that has a more outcome focus, it's a better conversation to have. It's also where, to Purnima's point, it's about leveraging technology to drive value from innovation, and it's about defining the right contractual agreement that essentially shares that value. Now, will artificial intelligence and the RPA deliver onto it? I think it's a function of, if you're pushing it out to your partners, it's about defining what outcomes do you want, what is the business objective behind it, what does RPA need to deliver on. I personally do not like to talk about let's just go automate things, because we all know automating a broken process only takes you so far. So if your process is broken, let's automate out of anything and everything out of it, you go so far. So it is all about driving effectiveness and efficiency at the same go. And automation should be part of it, but it is not the answer. In the same way, artificial intelligence is part of your game, it's not the full answer. So I think the question is that what is the overall business objective? And if you have the outcomes rightly thought through, I think you will have better results.
Okay. Another question? Lady here.
So I work in change management. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I come from a technology background. And whilst I earn for the day in which 2 algorithms will make a decision, one selects the technology and the other implements it, I have found that in my career, the skills that have mostly helped me and help me now are the human skills, the empathy, negotiation, being flexible, and which I find incredibly easy simply because they go along with experience. How do your organization, to the panel, pay attention to this type of skills in your workforce? Data scientists are great, absolutely, but this type of empathy and human skills are just as important. And I think your slide said that earlier, the human. So that's my question.
Go for it.
So I think that is a great question, and one of the skills that we didn't talk about, but it is I mentioned briefly, is dexterity. So maybe we could say that our industry and the company, but also the industry as large, is actually paying attention to dexterity with the whole makers movement. So this is people going back to doing things themselves. So the prosumer, so it's the consumer that produces these things, etc. That is, and in our companies we have, I forgot there was a great definition I heard recently. It's basically a gym for the mind. So you work with your hands in order to develop the ideas and the creativity of the mind. And a lot of the companies have in the design area, they will have a prototyping space where you go and do things like that. So it is, and also another data point is if you pick one of the most successful architects present here from London, Thomas Heatherwick. Thomas Heatherwick has just recently gave a keynote presentation, and it was completely like a theater. It was a drama, and he uses very effectively a whole set of skills, and is completely radically different from what we are expect to see from a successful businessman. So,
I'll jump in if.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the research we did showed that organizations are really struggling with change management with automation. I mean, when they started trying to scale up, they hit into all these traditional problems about transformational technology. And to the point where I was doing a session for some management consultancy firm who all about automation, and I said, well, don't worry, because just dust off all those change management slides that you parked for a long time, because believe you me, it's not going to be about the automation, it's going to be about the change management. And yes, you have to build up that capability to be able to, and this goes back to my point about the speed of technology deployment. You know, you've got to have an implementation capability to get it accepted, used, potential, optimized and institutionalized in an organization. It takes ages. Historically, information technology has not been adopted overnight, even if it's very, very good. So you're right. I think all these human traditional skills are still massively valuable to organizations. We have time, I'm told, for one more question, which is this man down here. Sorry about that. You can ask us over drinks at the Garrick Cafe, which I'm going to announce in a minute.
Thank you.
But we only have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Traditional education traditional higher education has focused on rewarding students that can provide the best answers, maybe as defined by their GPA or their degree classification. But some have argued that in an era of ubiquitous information, the future of work will reward those able to ask the best questions or the right questions. Does the panel agree? And if so, what steps do companies need to take to change their hiring processes? And are they taking those steps in your view? Thank you.
If I just may add, I completely agree with what Purnima said. I think where the change needs to happen, or where the shift needs to happen, is hiring cannot just focus on the skills, the core skills that the person brings onto the table, but his or her learnability, the adaptability to the new situation, because the businesses are going to go through much faster pace of change. We have to be ready for a lot more ambiguity in the workplace, and we have to be ready for uncharted complexity, as I kind of talked about, right? So if all of these are true, the skills of, say, you are a data scientist or whatever, you are an engineer, is definitely something that can be learned. But what can't be learned is, are you ready for the change, and are you having a positive attitude for the change? Because if you don't, you're going to fall through, and it's a challenge for the organization how they manage those people into the workforce. So I think when I was researching a few months back, Generation Z, which would be the biggest workforce by 2025, have those skills pretty much built in, because they are the ones that do not really care for a high-paying job to start with. They are more socially adaptive. They want to do multiple things at a time, which essentially enables them to have that learnability and adaptability of different environments. So I'm just hoping that if the research is true, the Generation Z are much more prepared for being more adaptable to the pace of change that we are going to come for.
Alvise, have you got any?
Well, I wonder whether, is a good question, and I wonder whether asking the right question leads you to develop a human-conceived models, which of course they are going to be redundant, may become detrimental. So maybe is to do with you know, what schools should teach is what's the missing data sets. You know, what are the missing data sets that are enabling some of these models, emergent models, biases in emergent models. And totally agree with my colleague about learning to learn. Is you know, the questions seems to be a little bit expert systems to me, asking the right question, but it's certainly certainly education is in a very difficult position because with the future that changes all the time, trying to educate for 10 years in the future is tricky. As well as parenthood, I think, is another one that is in a tricky position. What do you suggest your children to do when they reach the you know, A level, the end of compulsory education?
Okay, we're going to have to stop there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to hear from our distinguished panel. Once again, thanks to our speakers, Ramyani Basu, Alvise Simondetti, and Purnima Mookerjee.